Well, good afternoon. Hi. Good. Thank you for coming out. Are you enjoying our lecture series? Excellent, excellent. Well, we're trying to bring you as much in a variety of lectures as we possibly can, and today is certainly going to be no different. You had your Today on Location. That's the big document that we leave in your room every evening, and we featured the lady that you're about to see on the cover because her background is varied, and it is unique in itself in the way that she has certainly had a wonderful career, which also puts her in demand. She is an artist as well as a writer, as well as a biologist. And art and biology in the same category certainly makes her very unique and in demand. Now, when she does write, she writes under the name of E. King, Elizabeth Eve King. E. King was where you would find some of the books. We also put on the cover of the Today on Location, we also listed some of the books that she has coming out, as well as the ones that are on the market. And we also quoted some very famous people as to have previewed of her work and what they thought. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you E. King, which is actually known as Elizabeth King. Please welcome Elizabeth King.
Hi, thank you so much. Hi. Thank you so much for coming. You can all hear me, right? Great. So thank you very, very much for coming. I'm not going to tell you anything about myself because I've already had an intro, and I think you all got a bio. So if you have any questions, you can ask me. Any Canadians in the audience? Happy Thanksgiving! It's Canadian Thanksgiving. So happy Thanksgiving. So today I'm going to be talking about tampering with Eden. If you have any questions while I'm talking, just raise your hands and I will ignore you. No, seriously, remember there are no silly questions, only silly people. No, actually, if you have a question, probably a lot of other people have the same question because that's how humans are. Great minds think alike, or my mother actually always used to say, idiots seldom differ. I don't know, but if I don't have time, I'll be outside right after. Anytime you see me on the boat, come up and say, hey, what about tampering with Eden? What about it? Eden today is Hawaii in my lecture, but you can extrapolate to use especially any island group, because islands are unique ecosystems. Things come there, they get isolated, they change. Many biologists, I was telling somebody in the audience, also view mountaintops as a kind of island, both because of the microclimates that develop, and it's hard for things to move around, so they get separated. So first, I will be talking about both the formation of the islands, how things got to the islands, how they developed and interacted on the islands, and then how other things came and changed them, and various ideas about that, including some of my own that I've had recently. So first, where are we? We're in the Pacific, and size matters. Yes, it does. Actually, the Pacific is the largest body of water in the world, and if you took all the continents and laid them end to end, it would still be 4 times as big, the Pacific. Which reminds me of this Dorothy Parker joke, where she said, if you took all the girls in Bennington and laid them end to end, I wouldn't be in the least surprised. Also, depth matters. It's also the deepest place on the planet, not even just in the ocean. The Mariana Trench is over 7 miles deep in some places, and we probably haven't even sounded the deepest areas, so there's all kinds of weird stuff down there. And it's also one of the hottest places on the earth. In fact, Johnny Cash would feel right at home here because, yes, Ring of Fire, it's not just a song, it's also, this area is full of volcanic activity, more than any place else in the planet. And that's how these islands develop. What happens is you get an area under the ground where a little fissure develops and some hot magma or hot lava shoots through. And when hot lava meets cold or cool water, it hardens. And then you get more hot magma, and over millions and millions of years, you get a volcano. So Who do you think came up with this theory of how islands were formed? Plate tectonics, maybe even coral reef formation? Yes, Darwin. If the biologist, in fact, I think the geologists are going to start a paternity suit against the biologists. I mean, they may say he's the father of evolution, but he did. He came up with the idea of how islands were formed, have plate tectonics, realizing why you find seashells at the top of mountains because of the way the earth rises, and also how coral reefs form around them. Now, I'll be giving a lecture on coral reef later, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but that's how it is. And in Hawaii, you see here the age of the islands. I think it's really interesting. They go from northwest, being the oldest, to southeast, the youngest. So here we've got a 4 million year old island, and on the west half of Maui, it's over 1 million years old, but the east half is only 750 years old. And the big island of Hawaii is still enlarging, 300,000 years. And right off the coast, there's another island. It is called Lohihi, and it's 3,000 feet underwater. It's the size of Mount Everest. It's supposed to come through the earth in 50,000 years. So if you just hang in there, you'll have another hotspot to visit. And by hotspots, these actually are called hotspots. They're not where you spent last night in Honolulu, though they might be that too. How did plants and animals arrive on these islands? So we've gotten to the fact we've got all these hotspots. They form these lumps of lava, and they're just sitting there in the ocean. Nothing's around them. And you think, well, wind and ocean currents. Sure, but remember that Hawaii is 25,000 miles away from anything. That's a really long way for wind and water. Even if water washes a seed, the chances of it not sinking and still being viable, still being able to germinate when it gets to the island, not real big. We think coconuts can do it, but the coconuts in Hawaii were all brought over by Polynesians, so who knows for sure. Wind, yeah, that's a long way for a wind. Hurricanes, definitely. So what would have been the first things? Well, probably ferns. Because unlike most plants, ferns have spores. They're microscopic. They go in the air. They can be blown really far. And if you look at the roots of a fern, you'll see they're all hairy. Well, that's because they can take moisture from the air and utilize it. And their roots are really tough, so they can reach down into the volcanic soil and break it up and make nutrition possible for other plants. They're a really good species to start the process of making life available. So ferns, and then you get your hurricanes, and some ferns come, and then maybe a flock of finches gets trapped in the eye of a hurricane and blown off course. Or a flock of geese gets in the eye of the hurricane, and a few beetles. It's estimated that before any humans, before the Polynesians came, a species arrived on the islands about once every 100,000 years. There wasn't a lot of hurry. So what happens? So you get these finches, and you're thinking, finches arriving on an island, turning into different finches. Sounds familiar, right? Sounds like Galapagos and Darwin's finches. That's because it's the same thing. A group of birds, finches, often, I guess finches get trapped in hurricanes a lot. I don't know. Also geese, this happened with. And they arrived on Hawaii, and there's no competition, no predators, there's food, and there's no other birds there's no insect eaters, there's no seed eaters. So these finches, over time, of course, they develop different beaks. They develop beaks for fruit or grubs. There are a lot of tool-using finches on Hawaii where they will break off and they will dig out grubs. They will also dip the ends of the sticks in sap, and then like sticking gum on something to get your keys out of a grill. You Probably never done that. Okay, good. Good for you. You're a lot smarter than I am. But if you had, that's what they do to get food. And maybe they get their keys. I don't know. Insect eaters. And this is called radiation evolution. Has nothing to do with radioactive. These do not glow in the dark finches. You don't have to worry about them being near you. It just means they're radiating out from a single point, one species turning into a lot of species. One of the birds that radiated and turned into a lot of native Hawaiian endemic birds, in other words, birds that don't occur anywhere else but Hawaii, are called honey creepers. And you can see, oops, sorry, wrong little thing there. You can see their amazing beaks some of them develop, many of them. These long curved beaks that evolved with flowers so they could have the tongue that was just the right length to get the nectar out of the flower. It co-evolved. And most of the flowers that evolve like this are red or pink. Why? Because bees can't see red. Birds can. So if you go places and you see hummingbirds with those long tubular red flowers, long tubular red flowers have evolved where hummingbirds exist because bees don't pollinate them. They can't see that color. So you can often tell what kind of color flower you're going to get. Neat. Coevolution. Once again, you can see my great little beak there. I love him. And this is a very poorly drawn picture, but I use it because it shows quite neatly how a proboscis, in other words, a tongue as a proboscis of a moth, would develop to reach the nectar, and then so the flower evolves to reach the moth, but it evolves too far, so the moth has to evolve again. And most species do this little game of evolution. One evolves and then the other evolves. And eventually, usually, you will get one flower pollinated by one insect, one kind of insect, obviously, not like one single insect, but a species. So you kill a species of bee, you lose a species of flower. That's how it works. Coevolution also has its dark side. Ooh, this is a dark, evil side. No, it's not really. It's quite interesting. If you get butterflies, if you raise butterflies, and I've done a lot of work with raising monarchs and starting monarch migration through different areas in the world, including downtown LA, believe it or not. However, usually butterflies will eat a single kind of plant. Well, caterpillars. Butterflies don't. Caterpillars that are about to turn into butterflies. And when you get caterpillars, you get a lot of caterpillars. When you get a lot of caterpillars, you get a lot of plants being eaten, and the plant is upset about it. And when the plant is bitten, it sends a pheromone into the air, and this pheromone basically calls out, in essence, to some parasitoid wasps saying, "Help, I'm being eaten alive." And the parasitoid wasps hear it, and they fly down and they lay eggs on the body, of the caterpillar here. And you'll see it covered with little eggs, and it will wait till the caterpillar is ready to, its body will harden, turn into a chrysalis, and the parasitoid wasp will mature inside the body of the caterpillar and eat it from the inside out. And you'll get these chrysalises, and instead of a butterfly, you'll get these little wasps coming out. And in fact, Charles Darwin said he stopped believing in God when he saw parasitoid wasps eating a caterpillar from the inside out. And I've seen it many times, and it bothered me a lot at first, but once I realized that the plant was actually communicating to a wasp, I thought it was pretty interesting, actually. More coevolution. I don't know if you guys have seen newts. There are newts in Hawaii. There are newts in most places. They're kind of like salamanders. A lot of them are yellow or red-bellied, and they're very slow. And I hate to be insulting toward any animal, okay? but they seem really stupid. I've raised them, and you have to basically drop food on their head before they eat it. They sort of look like very slow, and they look around and you think, how could this animal possibly survive? And it's bright colored. Well, as many bright colored animals are, like frogs, like fish, they're saying, I'm bright because I'm toxic. Don't eat me. I'm not trying to hide. I'm not trying to camouflage. I'm being like, here I am. Go ahead. I dare you eat me because I'm going to kill you. And newts produce TTX, which is a toxin. Most animals cannot eat it. However, there's a kind of snake that has evolved a TTX resistant. But there's a trade-off. If the newt makes too much TTX, its sperm count gets too low and it can't produce babies. If the snake produces too much TTX resistance, its ability to crawl fast is lessened, and eventually a bird or a car or something else will eat it. So you've got this juggling act going on all the time. Now, this is a different kind of evolution, and this is called convergent evolution. Convergent evolution, here you have Australia, and then you have mammals from, Europe or America or most places in the world, except Australia and New Zealand. And convergent evolution is you'll look and you'll say, wow, here we have a creature. It's got a long nose. It's got a very sticky tongue. It's got really tough feet. And it's got a stomach that is like a rock. It can digest high acid foods. Why? Because it eats ants, and ants are very, very acidic. If you have acid reflux, stay away from the ants on the menu. Then you go to America and you see this animal, long nose, sticky tongue, really tough feet, stomach that can digest anything, and you say, wow, these guys must be related. And you look at their DNA, no, totally different branches of evolution. But animals evolve similar body plans to deal with similar problems. So ants or squirrels, here you can see the flying squirrel thing that looks the same, but this is not a squirrel. It's got a really ugly little name here, long name, and it's a marsupial. So that's convergent evolution. And this is your convergent evolution. You get several crustaceans that show up at the classification party, and they all have the same body plan. How embarrassing. Ugh. Okay, so we've got our little paradise, if you will, right? And you've got ferns, and you've got all these honey creepers. Don't forget the little honey creeper birds and other animals. Plus, you've got tons of different kinds of geese. Lots and lots of species of flightless geese, in fact. We believe there were 11 species of birds that came over and developed into all these different kinds. But then you get Polynesians who arrive about the 3rd century, and they bring with them pigs and dogs and chickens and, by accident, rats, and by accident, freshwater clams in the roots of their taro plants, and about 24 species of plants and big plants like trees, like coconut, banana, breadfruit, so not little teeny plants. So that changes things. And there are these koa trees that grow along the coast that the honey creepers like. But by now the coast has been broken up. All that lava soil is all broken up, and it's rich, it's nice. And so they cut down the trees, and they flood these and make mud banks of them to plant taro in, from which you make poi, which is one of the staple foods. I think it tastes horrible personally, but perhaps if that was your diet, you would like it. Or maybe it's an acquired taste, I don't know. Anyway, but they're beautiful plants. I love the way they look. But they're water plants, often grown as ornamentals. So they would grow them along the coast, and the trees get cut down. Then you get the whalers, and they bring with them all kinds of things, including tons of venereal diseases, as well as measles and smallpox and different kinds of rats. Can't have too many rats. Then you get missionaries bringing other things. The missionaries came in 1820, and entrepreneurs out of the missionaries. So all these different things. Oh, by the way, this boat, which you will probably get a different lecture about by somebody else, but it's one of the original Polynesian vessels. You know, at first people were like, how could they have come here? And now we've recreated, actually, their ships. Amazing, amazing vessels. I will show you some pictures of those in other lectures. So, just to review a couple of terms before I go on so it all makes sense to you. We've got indigenous or native, same thing, it just means you're from here. But say you come here, you're from here, and you develop, you evolve into a new species that exists only there, only on the island, only on the mountaintop, only on the west half of Southern California. It can be anywhere, it just means it only exists in that place and no one else. Now, where else? That is endemic. Indigenous, you can be indigenous a lot of things. Egrets are indigenous birds to a lot of areas. They belong there. Introduced, brought in, or alien. Really means the same thing. It's just introduced sounds nicer. So if you don't like something, you say it's alien. If you like it, you say it's introduced. Same thing, I believe, with naturalized and invasive. So you introduce something, you plant it in your garden, and it feels right at home, and before you know it, it's growing in the forest, and you say, oh, it's naturalized. Or it's growing in the forest, and you say, it's invasive. It's similar, though you can get plants that are invasive in that they will take over natural habitats. They will be very destructive. Not all introduced plants are. Water hyacinths. I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're beautiful water plants, purple flowers, but they're very invasive. They just grow and they will ruin a waterway faster than you can say water hyacinths, at least if you're me. Okay, and some more words for our next plants. Symbiosis. Everybody thinks symbiosis, it's this relationship between two beings, either two animals, two plants, an animal and a plant, that is mutually beneficial. But scientists break that down a little more. So there are three kinds of symbiosis. There is mutualism, and that's the kind we think about. That's where a plant and an animal, or two plants, or two animals, live together or work together and help each other out. They both benefit from this relationship. Then we have commensalism. Mensa is Latin for table. Commensalism means sitting together at the same table. I don't really know how this translates into what commensalism means, which is a relationship where one party benefits and the other isn't affected one way or the other. And then you have parasitism, a parasite, which most people know. So, egrets. Egrets are an example of mutualism. These are cattle egrets. There are many kinds of egrets. You've probably seen them, beautiful big white shorebirds. They catch fish sometimes. Cattle egrets usually stay on cattle and they pick off the bugs. So it's a mutualistic relationship. The cattle bug gets a bug cleaner and the egret gets fed. They were brought into Hawaii in the 1950s when a lot of cattle was brought in. They thought, great, we're going to bring in these birds, they're going to clean off our cattle. Well, the egrets got here, and like a lot of things in Hawaii, it thought, yeah, I don't know, I think I could do better over here. In fact, I think if I hang out at some of the resorts and follow around the lawnmowers, look at all these bugs. It's much better. And they are called, in Hawaii today, lawnmower birds. Cattle egrets, you see they have these little yellow feet. They're really smart birds. They'll go like this in the water, and a fish will hit their feet, because they hit things like that. They think it's something to eat, and then the bird will get to eat the fish. And in Japan, there are some egrets that were in this park, and they noticed fishermen baiting and catching in their rods with pieces of bread. And they thought, So they started collecting bits of food and throwing it in, and the bird would hit. and the fish would hit it, and then the egret would get fed. And they thought, do we even need food? So they began collecting all the trash around the lake, throwing it in the lake. Fish would hit the trash, birds would get a meal. This is a learned behavior, because in other areas, egrets do not do this. So you can see I'm an egret fan. And now, my commensurate on this lecture example are epiphytes. Epiphyte means air plant. There are different classifications, and epiphyte means a plant that can basically survive on air as opposed to being planted in the soil. So you've seen probably orchids growing on trees, or these things, bromeliads, which are now very popular house plants, but they don't need soil. Bird's nest ferns. But they don't hurt the tree either. The tree's unaffected. The tree doesn't care. Grow here, don't grow here, I don't care. However, the epiphyte, of course, gets a place to live. And parasitism. Here's a very fat mosquito, and he says, I'm going to recommend you start biting only vegetarians. Well, mosquitoes, actually, male mosquitoes are vegetarians. It's only the females that bite you. I know if you tell a man that, he usually says, I've known a lot of women like that. But the reason is she needs your blood to get enough proteins and fats to lay eggs and produce her young. I realize it's hard to be sympathetic to mosquitoes, I know, but that's why. And in her bite, she has both an anticoagulant, so she can just suck it up like a straw, and she also has a kind of an analgesic, so you don't actually feel her when she bites you. It's after she leaves that you get the itch. And that little ee, really annoying sound, it's the sound of her wings beating so fast. She doesn't make any noise at all. It's just she moves her wings so fast. It vibrates the air and you can hear it. So, cool facts about mosquitoes. Great dinner party conversation. It'll say, did you know mosquitoes don't actually make noise? People say no, and they bite you back for dinner all the time. Try it. This is the koa tree I told you about. Now we're going to go backwards. Remember my honey creepers, the birds with the long curved beaks that were living in the koa trees that got cut down to plant the taro. There were still koa trees, just not as many, just not on the edges of the island. They were further up in the forests, but you still had enough koa trees for the honey creepers. Now, there were not as many honey creepers as you would think. Well, by this time, we've had some birds introduced. We have our little Japanese white-eyes, which you will see in Hawaii. They're very sweet little birds. They are from Japan. Ugh. We've got sparrows and starlings introduced from Europe into America and from America into Hawaii. They are competing with the honey creepers, some of the honey creepers. So the honey creepers' life is not as easy as it used to be. There are fewer trees, they have competition, but it's about 1827 that the naturalists really start saying, look at all these amazing birds, let's start categorizing them. Let's make a book of all these amazing Hawaiian birds. So the naturalists are just getting out their brushes and they're getting out their pens, and almost as they're drawing them, the birds are just dropping dead. Okay, like I said, their trees cut down a lot. Competition, but not enough to make this difference. What could it be? Well, the Wellington. The Wellington was a merchant ship that had visited Hawaii in the early 1800s. And when they visited Hawaii in the early 1800s, it was a great place for them. They were greeted by beautiful, half-naked or fully naked Hawaiian women who would swim out to the boats, would be happily exchange sex for iron nails, which were very popular, red feathers, big deal, because red's a royal color, or just for nothing at all, because really Polynesian culture and European American culture the mores are very different. There were a lot of taboos, known as capus, against what you could eat, when you could eat, who you could eat with, but not a lot about who you could have sex with or not. I mean, there were some, but it was viewed differently. It was a lot worse for a woman to eat a banana than to sleep with someone. So the sailors, this was like sailor heaven, right? Well, 1819, King Kamehameha dies, and sort of the Kapu system broke down for a while, and then the missionaries come in 1820. And the missionaries convert the Hawaiians, basically. And so when the Wellington arrives in 1826, they're not greeted by these Hawaiians women. The Hawaiian women are wearing muumuus. I mean, whereas the Wellington wanted alcohol, sex, and sandalwood, the missionaries wanted souls and workers. So the Wellington guys are not happy. In fact, they are really pissed off. And they're like, fine, you're gonna make us suffer, we're gonna make you suffer. So they took all these barrels of stagnant water in which were swimming little question marks in the water, and they dumped them into the rivers in Lahaina. And they were mosquito larvae. Yep. So that is why. So every time you go, darn that Wellington. The mosquito larvae didn't like Lahaina streams nearly as well as the stagnant barrels, but they did okay there. And so later in the year, in 1826, some of the Hawaiians wake up and suddenly they hear this noise in their ears, they're scratching, they have welts. And imagine if you've never experienced mosquitoes before. I mean, we don't like them, but we at least know what they are. I mean, people were really freaked out. The missionaries knew what they were and practically smothered people by trying to make mosquito nets out of calico. So, now we go back to my honey creepers that are dying like flies, or like honey creepers in this case, right? And people don't know why. Well, they noticed these strange infectious lesions, sorry, I always have trouble with that word, lesions on the feet and sometimes the bodies of these birds, and they thought, what's going on? Well, there's a doctor from India who was studying malaria and started looking at these honey creepers, and he said, oh my God, they have what's known as avine malaria. And most birds have an immunity to malaria. Mosquitoes can bite them, and there'll be a little bit of malaria, but not much. But these honey creepers have not evolved with mosquitoes, so they have no resistance, zero resistance, none resistance built up to these. And they were largely wiped out. But what's happened is they've moved up and up and up the mountains, because the mosquitoes are slowly climbing the mountains too. And this happens again and again in endemic island life, where slowly the life starts going up the mountains. So you can still find honey creepers at the top of mountains in Hawaii. Not all of them. A lot of the species have died. Most of the species, there's one species left, the state goose of Hawaii, or the state bird of Hawaii, is a goose. And there were, as I think I said, a lot of flightless geese. Because we think, man, you can fly, that sounds great. But if a goose doesn't need to fly, he's like, fine, I won't fly. And then the Polynesians come in and you do need to fly, it turns out. Mongoose, Riki Tiki Tiki, someone was saying. Yes, from the famous snake killer. If you like Kipling, you're probably all familiar with mongoose. Mongoose were also introduced. They were introduced because when the sugar cane was planted, the sugar cane was very popular food, not just for people, but also for rats. So this guy got this great idea, let's bring in mongoose that we know kill snakes in India, and maybe they'll kill the rats in Hawaii. This was not really well thought out. Why? Well, first of all, rats are nocturnal. They hunt at night. And mongoose are diurnal. They hunt in the day. So when the rats are out eating the sugar cane, the mongoose are in bed, sleeping off all the native bird eggs they've eaten. And yes, mongoose like eggs. So they also made a big dent in the bird population. Now, for a long time, mongoose were very, very unpopular in Hawaii. There was even tales, this may or may not be an urban legend, there was a B&B on Lahaina, and they said they would give you a free room if you brought them a dead mongoose and proved that you had killed it. You'd say, how do you kill a mongoose? Well, mongoose run. They run really fast across the roads, but they can't run and turn their head at the same time. So the way to get a mongoose, they said, was to be driving. You see a mongoose, you honk your horn, mongoose turns his head over the mongoose. But they would actually ask you to match your tire tread with the tread on the mongoose to prove, yes. So if you found a dead mongoose, you could like run it over and then claim it as your own, I guess. But they have discontinued this practice. And in fact, now mongoose are often called the Hawaiian squirrel. And people don't seem to mind them anymore. I sort of think that tends to be the way a new species is introduced and everyone's like, oh no, except mosquitoes, I guess everyone's still oh no. But many times mongoose, for instance, are now sort of part of the landscape. Coquis. Coquis are from Puerto Rico. They're very small frogs. There used to be about 9 species of them. Now there are 3. They are from Puerto Rico. They were recently introduced to Hawaii. Now, in Puerto Rico, they are loved. In fact, the internet in Puerto Rico is called CoquisNet. And all night long, the male coquis will go, coquis, 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 coquis. And when they were introduced to Hawaii, many people were like, it's going to ruin our tourist trade because people won't like the sound of all these coquis going, coquis, 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 all night. But actually in Puerto Rico, people will take tapes of coquis song because they can't sleep without it. I studied coquis in Puerto Rico, and it's really interesting because coquis are the one frog, you can see here this is a male. And you say, how do you know? How do you know it's a male? Well, I know because he's sitting on his eggs. Coquis are the only frog that do not lay their eggs in water and become tadpoles. They lay their eggs on leaves, the male guards them, and then they hatch out into minuscule little frogs. He guards them for another couple of weeks until they hop around and start yelling on their own. The males, as in all frogs, are the only ones that yell. And when they go co, that means this is my area, you keep away, to other males. When he goes kee, it means, hey babe, I got a great leaf, I'm happy to look after your eggs for you, why don't you meet me at this leaf on the corner? So the female, she can only hear the key sound, that means come over here, I'm waiting for you. She can't hear the co sound. How do we know this? Good question. You take a female coquis and you put 2 speakers on either end of her, and you play her different sounds and you see how she reacts or when she reacts. She does not react to the co sound, so we figure she doesn't hear it. Either that or she's just like, I don't care if you're fighting. But that's what we figure anyway. Also, wait, I'm going back to coquis. I decided I wasn't done with coquis. Coquis, it's interesting because in most of the world, as you may know, frogs are in trouble. Frogs are in trouble. Frogs and coral, basically amphibians, they're sort of what biologists think of as the canary in the coal mine species. In other words, when climate change happens, when acid rain happens, when there are changes in the environment, these animals are very sensitive because of their skin, because they go in land and water, they have porous skin, and they're one of the first species where we start thinking, oh no, what's happening to the environment? And all over the world, frogs were getting all these weird diseases. And people didn't know what it was. Scientists were searching and searching, and finally they found there's this fungus called Kittredge fungus affecting frog populations all over the world. And if you do research in Puerto Rico, same thing with the honey creepers in Hawaii, it's moving up the mountains. So at the top of mountains, the coqui population is much better off than at the bottom of mountains. But Kittredge fungus has been, if you look at slides from the 1960s in libraries where they keep slides of fungus, it's like, that's the kind of library I like to go to. Can I check out my favorite fungus today? But Kittredge fungus was in existence then. It was around. It just wasn't that prevalent. Whatever's happened, or whatever is happening has made it more, frogs are easier to get to. They have less resistance to that fungus. However, the frogs in Hawaii are doing fabulous. And there's been a lot of contention because people were like, they're going to hurt the tourist trade, they're eating bugs, they're going to compete with other species. And we don't really know if that's true. So there's a lot of people saying, hey, you should be glad you've got healthy frogs. I think eventually people will grow to love the coquis. That's my theory anyway. Then we have this grass. Remember, we brought in the cows, so we brought in the egrets to eat the bugs off the cows. Well, they also brought in some grass, and they thought, these cows they're eating all these plants, they're eating native plants. We don't want this. We're going to bring in this grass. They're going to love it. The grass gets to Hawaii, and grass does what most things do in Hawaii. It says, oh, this is great. I love this climate. Wow. And it grows so tall that it grows too tall for the cows. Basically, they can't eat it anymore because it's got these thick stems, and the grassy part that they're supposed to eat is now over their heads. So it becomes another invasive species. It's now known as haole grass. Haole, you probably know, is a name for white people or certainly non-Hawaiians. It's not really flattering. So this isn't that popular a grass. Barn owls, they were introduced in the 1950s, once again to combat rats, and they compete a bit, we think, with this species, which is an endemic to Hawaii. Now, these owl was also brought in pretty late in the game, but it has developed so it exists nowhere else, and it is one of the ancestor spirits. Where you will see tattoos. There were a bunch of different ancestor spirits, which I will talk a lot more about in my lecture tomorrow on gods and Hawaiian culture. But he does eat rats. They both eat rats. But are they really competing? I don't know. Once again, there's a lot of competition about that in the biological world. And but some people were claiming they were going to start a egret and owl extermination program in the hopes of wiping them out by 2015. So my idea is biologists, a lot of times their big deals are invasive species. And certainly if you bring in a species, it will change the environment. No doubt about it. If you bring in certain species, other species will go extinct. This is correct. But is it that different for a clam to come in on the foot of a bird, or in the bow of a canoe, or in the bow of a cruise ship? I don't know. So I have we are all connected to each other biologically, to the earth chemically, and to the rest of the universe. I can't say that right now. Atomically? Is that right? Thank you. Great. Because we are, in fact, people are always saying things like, we have, 97% DNA of a chimpanzee. Well, we've got 30% of the same DNA as a carrot. So I don't know. So that's my thoughts about this particular problem. What time is it? I'm sorry, I lost time. Oh, it is time? Okay, because I had some more stuff, but